Something is wrong. But he's talking.
Hi Tati, hi Carol, how are you doing?
Very good, Pritesh. How are you?
Pritesh, we good, thanks.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to everyone who's joining us for another edition of the Loeries Creative Hour. It's an amazing one because we have two amazing individuals I've known for quite a few years, Kelo Kubu and Tati Mokoro, who are joining us from Tedx Johannesburg. Kelo is the TEDx licensee and ambassador, and Tati is the curator for Tedx Johannesburg. And it's going to be a fascinating discussion. As we all know, though, there's load shedding happening throughout South Africa. So those of you who are joining us from South Africa, I'm sure you're experiencing this. For everyone who's tuning live on Zoom, but also on Facebook Live, we've got over 11,500 people who maybe have access to this through our Facebook Live feed. If you're tuning in from outside of South Africa, it's interesting times for us. So we have load shedding, which means that we don't really have access to electricity all the time, and we're trying to make the best of the situation. So if the feed is slow at times, or if you do miss certain bits, please bear with us during this time, but it's going to be a fascinating discussion. Kelo and Tati, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time and coming through to share some insights about Tedx Johannesburg.
Thank you. And yeah, we're glad to be doing this with.
And I think there's a little delay in the line over there. Maybe we can start. Tati, can you hear me clearly on that side?
We can hear you. We can hear you. There's a little bit of a buzz in your voice, but we can hear you.
And there are those little challenges that we may be experiencing thanks to. Take us back to when you actually brought Tedx. And there goes the towers around us. Apologies, everyone. We seem, as I said, with the challenges of the load shedding. I know the networks are a bit strained. Yeah. Thanks for Mohammed for highlighting that strange. Tati and Kelo, can I leave this to you? This is a major journey bringing it here.
Say that again, Pritesh.
Can you tell us more about Tedx Johannesburg and your journey bringing Tedx Johannesburg to South Africa?
Okay. Yes, whoever is listening, please bear with us with the internet connection. So our journey started 2006 when we first came across TED Talks, and it culminated in us hosting our first TEDx event in 2010. This was in Soweto. And this was a launch pilot, as TED thought at that point, that they just want to see if this can work outside the US. So it's been 11 years. Yeah, exciting 11 years.
Fantastic. And I know I was lucky enough to be involved in 2013 when I got a chance to to speak at a TEDx event, which was an amazing experience for anyone who hasn't been through it as well. Maybe one of the things was useful is to take us through. There's a process. There's a process of getting the content, and then there's a process of getting that content ready. Can you tell us about how important it is to get the right content?
Well, the thing we start with is to find a theme, and the theme is usually driven by just, you look around and you try to get a sense of what's going on in the moment, what's the zeitgeist, what is, also, forgive the French, genius loci. I know it's not French, it's Latin, right? You try to work with that and figure out where people are at, find a theme that defines both those considerations, and look for speakers that can speak to that. You also want to see, where the world is going, what the trends are, and try and dovetail the discussion with a broader global discussion. So it's quite a few things that are involved. And then after that, it's really keeping your ear to the ground, keeping your eyes open with a pen in hand, and a little notebook, and always paying attention to the people who are doing interesting things, people who are popping up, whether in the media, whether in conversations. But you do a lot of people watching, and then maybe there's a little bit of stalking online, looking at people and following them around and seeing what interesting things they're up to, who's doing big work out there. But it's fascinating, and it's really healthy because it keeps you in touch with what's going on around you and around the world.
Fascinating. And then when you had to start your first event, and trying to put all this content together and getting individuals to agree to this, how difficult was it when you weren't able to say, hey, have a look, we've already done, like, I think, how many have you done now? You've done about 18, or maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. You've done a lot of events now.
Just under 20, 18.
Yeah. Just under 20. So how difficult was the first one when people didn't, well, they knew TED, but they didn't know Tedx Johannesburg?
I think we were lucky because this was 2010, and the internet was, broadband was relatively new in South Africa. So those few lucky individuals who had access to the internet could watch TED Talks, and the idea that you could have a talk on a TEDx stage that is similar to this thing that you just discovered on the internet, it wasn't really that difficult to sell. And we tapped into our background. We also work in the creative space. So by default, you start with the people that are familiar with the landscape that you operate in. So I remember our first event, we had just under 17 speakers. And
it was, no, it was 20 speakers. If
it was a long April day.
Long day in Soweto. On April the 27th, actually, on Freedom Day in Soweto at the Apartheid Museum. So I can never forget the whole combination of date, place, and moment.
Significant. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're having one of those moments.
Oopsie.
Oh, it's amazing. And then when you actually brought it to South Africa, I mean, how supportive was TED in the idea? You mentioned that they were one. Oh, is my voice going again?
No, it's okay. I think actually the journey.
Oh, this is so sad because I mean there's so much stuff we need to chat.
It's okay.
Hi, Tati and Kello. As soon as you can hear me, give me a thumbs up and let me know.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm blaming Eskom for this. Eskom, terrible. We've normally had this like flawless. But how's Africa and what were their thoughts about it?
So the journey actually started a few years before TEDx as a platform was created. So when we saw TED.com, the first talks that they launched in 2006, we were crazy enough to approach them and say, we want to bring the whole thing to South Africa. And it was a lot of to and fro. I remember the first meeting, I went to Tanzania, and then we had a meeting, we went to the US. We spent like around 2 weeks in the US. We went to London, spent a few days. So we did this globe-trotting
Wow.
process. And they agreed to say, let's see if it will work. So the first idea was actually going to be a TED Africa conference modeled on TED itself. And when TED was supportive, which was interesting enough, the people who were not supportive were South Africans and South African companies because they thought,
wow.
No, but here's what it is. If you go, this is 2008, right? You go to anyone and you say to them, okay, so we're doing this thing, man. We're bringing some of the smartest people in the world. We're bringing, at that time, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, the owners of Google, the guys who started the internet, basically, or the guys who invented the future. We bring them here. The inventors, the innovators, you name them. This is 2008. People found it hard to believe you, and it didn't help that we were a bunch of black people. I gotta promise you that. Sorry, it really didn't help. It just seemed unlikely, and one can kind of like, in hindsight, understand the difficulty.
Yeah, I think that was one huge part of the challenge, and then the 2008 financial debacle happened, so we had to shelve.
Yes.
But I think, looking back, I actually always say it's a blessing in some form, because then everybody had to take a step back. And TED used that moment to say, what if we have to reimagine this? Just reimagine. At that point, TED today, if you want to attend a TED conference in Canada, it's $12,000.
US.
Wow.
5 days.
Wow.
And back then, when we were looking at the ticketing modeling, we were saying we would be charging people $3,000. This is 2008 in South Africa.
Wow.
So
Unbelievable.
TEDx was a blessing to say, how can you localize it? How can you make it low cost? And how can you detach it from all the glitz and glamour that you see on TED.com, but also how can you scale it? Because if you look today, there are 2,500 TEDx licenses globally. Basically,
wow.
Every major city has its own TEDx event.
Yeah, and a few more.
And TED is just monitoring the brand and guiding on the content when necessary. But the first model of, say, export this big, massive, expensive thing to one city was not going to be sustainable.
Wow. And so maybe also what's useful is there must be some motivation for the both of you to get to the spot. And for those of us in our network who don't know Kelo and Tati, can you tell us about your background? Tati, you're a creative and lots of people in our network don't know that. So maybe take this from your background and how that actually comes to a point of Tedx Johannesburg.
Yeah, my professional background is in advertising, but later on in design, branding and design. But I started off in advertising way back in 1997, I think, and I was working at Leo Burnett, in Sunning Hill, Willie Sonnenberg, and then later on with Basil Mina and all sorts of crazy kids, pioneering. Finding a new language for advertising that speaks the local dialect, at a time again when advertising spoke a very different language, a very different accent, a very different dialect. So I'm proud to have been part of that initial, prodding and probing into how best can we, can we localize this stuff, make it sound like it comes from here. So I've been fascinated with that from the get-go. But I always felt that, ideas, I felt like, they were imprisoned in this A4 page or 30-second ad, or, whether on TV, on radio, or the billboard. And I felt like there was stuff beyond products and brands. And I kept looking, and I came across, or at least, when I was working with Kedo, we came across TED because we had been searching for a vehicle that can take us to the broader edges of what ideas are and what they can do in the world, and I dare say also in the universe. So there is this, there's this seed that was planted in me by advertising and the world of design that I felt could be spread out and used to explore other parts of this world of ideas. And through that process, and through TED and TEDx, we've gotten into astronomers and writers and all sorts of other professions and professionals and disciplines that create this world that we call, humanity.
Great. And Kelly, your background?
It's crazy, finance.
Oh.
So I have like two parts to finance. Firstly, in the banking, commercial banking sector, but secondly, in development finance. I used to work with a lot of German funding agencies.
Wow.
So at some point, the transition for Tati from advertising to design, and we thought, oh, let's found a creative design studio. And I think at the beginning, the idea was that I'll do the numbers, since that's what I used to.
Yeah. And you know what has happened since is that she is now the creative. And I'm still working on the numbers thing so we can swap. That's what that happens when people work together. They become a bit more of what the other person is. It's weird. There's a TED Talk.
There is a TED Talk in there because there's the best partnership. So I was chatting to Garrett Leck and Pepe Murray from Joe Public on one of these platforms, and they said it's the best thing. You need a finance business-minded person to join the creative, and they go, there's one additional person that adds. So maybe there's an opportunity for one more person. They go as strategist. So they wish they'd known they could have added a strategist into that. And if you get a strategist, a creative, and a business finance person, you're set to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And then everybody becomes a mashup of everybody else. Still
Absolutely. In terms of content, in terms of process of finding content, as we've seen, you theme each year and or each event, and you have a different theme and you run it. How do you then go about, what is the process of actually finding the right content to fill that theme? And I think lots of people don't realize the amount of work that's behind the scenes. Can you take us through that process?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I appreciate with the TED and TEDx Plus platform is the interdisciplinary nature of what we do. So a lot of conferences or events, you find that it's in the creative space, so you technically go look for people in the creative space. But TED insists that you have to cover all disciplines. So firstly, we look at, okay, have we covered everything from science right through to poetry and everything in between? And then we look at, we are in South Africa, so we have to also factor in the demographic. Have we looked at representation, like men, women, LGBTQ, people of color, like everything that
Do we have
reflects,
enough white people on the lineup?
yes,
That's a real consideration.
who are we? Then we take the theme and say, in the sciences, who can speak to this theme? In business, who can speak to this theme? So and I've seen the trap where people look at events and think, oh, who's the famous person who's speaking? Whereas we usually go and say, what is the topic? What is the idea? And literally go find a person who already has that idea and try and work with them to bring it out.
And often that person is not a speaker. In fact, very few of the people that we invite to speak are considered professional speakers or just even good speakers. We have to get that talk out of them. And picture this: if somebody is working in a science lab or even a design studio, they're most likely not a particularly good public speaker, but they might be doing the most awesome work in the world. Our job is to go find them to begin with, because they might not necessarily be anywhere in the bookshelves or maybe sometimes not even on the internet often. But we have to go find them. And then secondly, we have to help them craft that idea and help get that idea out of them. Sometimes you find it ready, but sometimes you find it raw. And you have to be able to work with both. The magic is when the audience is sitting there and they're looking at this and they're thinking, wow, you basically combed all of society and you've been able to find the gems and you brought them here onto the stage. I never knew these people existed. I'd never heard about them. That's really, the best talks are usually delivered by people that nobody's ever heard about.
I know I've been lucky to attend quite a few of the Tedx Johannesburg events as well, but also having to see the behind the scenes of the way you craft the content, because I remember it didn't matter if you'd spoken before, I hadn't spoken before, every single person who you had in the lineup, and I remember being in that lineup too, had to go for a rehearsal and go through a whole process. And I remember we did it at 44 and Stanley. It was 44 and Stanley, where we all had to get there, and we were gone to a room and you go through it, do it. And we went, and every single person just stood there going through their points. And I think that's what's amazing about the process that you use.
I think we have about 2 rehearsals before. So by the time a speaker steps onto the stage, we've done 2 rehearsals. The first rehearsal is virtual because somebody might be in Cape Town, Nairobi, Lagos. The next rehearsal is, a week before the event. And the idea is, on location, the idea is just in case, the speaker needs to work on the talk a little bit more, there's another week to do so. And then we sometimes even have a rehearsal the day before or the actual event. So by the time, some speakers, by the time they step onto the stage, they've done this talk with us 4 times. We insist that, over and above that, you will have done it maybe 50 times with, friends, family, spouse, anyone. I know speakers who will have rehearsed their talk in some form or another 50 times by the time they step onto the stage, but they sound like the most natural people, and that's a key thing, and that's what people don't often understand. I don't think there's anything like over-rehearsed. There's under-rehearsed. I totally understand what that is. Under-rehearsed sounds like somebody who has kind of tried to memorize the talk, but they are working very hard at getting it out of their minds. But a well-rehearsed person just sounds like they're speaking, they're having a little chat. It's the most natural. In fact, you can stop them, change the topic, and they will be able to come back to where they left the talk and continue, without missing a beat. And that's the thing, you've got to internalize the information. You've got to make it yours. Say it in the way that you would say it in natural speech. And just step onto the stage and speak to your friends and share this idea, this information that you have in your head with your friends, and literally try and transfer it into their brains.
And I mean, sometimes we've lost, not a lot, maybe 1 or 2 speakers or potential speakers, people who'd say, I just want to come on the day and say my, look, we've had to do that and just let one speaker, he's an exceptional human being who just said, I'll show up an hour before, don't bother me.
Who was it?
And that was William.
Oh, really?
I am not going to question William.
Okay.
And he came, he brought his memory stick for the presentation and he delivered a beautiful talk.
Yeah.
But he's a master at what he does. But for most people, you need to work at this. So we insist, Ted insists, but now and again, someone will say, that's not my thing. And we're like, okay, we have to part ways because we also can't take the risk. We charge people to attend. It's a volunteer pro bono platform. We don't get paid for doing it. Don't ask me why 10 years later we still doing it. But we get no money from this. But we do charge people a fee and we ask them for a lot of their time. Sometimes it's the whole day. So we really need to make sure that when they're sitting there, it's worth the money that they paid and it's worth the time. So it's on us to make sure that the speakers are ready, entertaining, and at least they leave you with something that you can take with to say, you know, I learned something from Tedx.
Just one more thing there, Pritesh.
Yeah, sure.
And I think, you know, let's agree that the most important thing is not even the speaker, perhaps not even the audience. It's the idea. You know, it would be a great disservice to the idea if, you know, somebody with the most awesome idea, he's working on saving the world, you know, probably, but they are unable to articulate this idea in a way that can persuade people to come along with them. That would be a tragic situation. And then our job is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And if a speaker stands in the way of that happening, you know, we'd rather not continue that relationship.
That makes perfect sense. I was thinking about the William Kentridge example you used. It now makes sense why he was one of the few TEDx speakers I ever saw who actually had a piece of paper in his hand when presenting.
Yeah. He had a book. He had a sketch pad. And he would look at it, but you know, it had his notes, and you know, I would pay a lot of money for that sketch pad.
I would. Tati, you should have asked him for it. You've got no use for it right now. I'd be very happy to take those old pages up here. I wanted to. While my internet connection says it's unstable, so hopefully you can hear me for this part. I've got a question from. Oh, brilliant! I'm having these little mini heart attacks every time it says your internet connection is unstable. But it's the reality of the world we live in right now. Mohammed Jogi asks, how does South Africa compare versus other nations in terms of nurturing creative and innovative minds? And I think that's a great question because it focuses on that creative and innovative mind. How do you find, and maybe within the TED and the TEDx universe, how do you find that process?
Yeah. Hi, Mo. Mohammed is one of the crazy people who at some point joined the TEDx platform to volunteer. And then we went on and did other things with him.
And he was also a speaker.
Equally
great. I think I remember being in the audience here. I feel like I've heard all these talks.
We did a poster campaign project to celebrate Nelson Mandela's birthday.
Yes.
He spoke on that topic. But for me personally, because I spend a lot of time in the TEDx network, I think we're not doing very well. We seem to have this idea, South Africans, that we are amazing, we're creative, we're shattering boundaries, but we're not. Because, and I use for TEDx a simple example. So what TED does is that at the end of each event, we actually don't publish the talks. We send them to New York, they look at them and they publish them. Now and again, they might not publish a talk for whatever reason. The second thing that they do is that they take those talks and the ones that are good enough for a global audience, they actually put them on TED.com. We have never had a TEDx talk, maybe 2 TEDx talks from South Africa that went straight onto TED.com, unless if it was an effort, an extraordinary effort where we are working directly with TED to say we are consciously looking for South Africans. But just from what other countries do, they just submit their talks onto TED.com, and TED is like, wow, there's something worth picking up, or there's a speaker worth inviting to TED. We've had 2 speakers getting invited to go speak on the global TED platform, but there are TEDx's where they've had like 20 people who've spoken at TED or whose talks have gone on to TED.com. And the criteria, I had the benefit of spending some time at the TED office at some point. And when you look at the rigor of, they literally look at those TEDx talks and they look at those ideas to say, we want to hear voices from the world and what people are doing. And South Africa doesn't do very well. But when you're at home, everybody's like, we are this creative nation, we're doing these amazing things. But when you step out to the world, you don't see them. And then sometimes, I mean, I have an argument here with us and TEDx to say, maybe we're not curating properly. Maybe we are not looking at the ideas that, you know, change the world. But even when you step outside the TEDx platform and you say, okay, where are South Africans? Say, for example, in the tech space, when you go to Silicon Valley, maybe there's 1 or 2, but yeah, that's my take, that we overplayed our capabilities.
Yeah. I think, you know, if I can just give you my take on that.
Please, yeah.
I do think I think we're still searching for who we are and what we are best at. We still haven't quite found our USP. At some point, we thought we knew what it was. You know, when Mandela was the flavor of the decade, we thought we knew what it was, but then it kind of escaped us. And, you know, Silicon Valley knows what Silicon Valley does. You know, Scandinavia is kind of clear about what Scandinavia does. You know, South Korea China knows what China does, you know, and China knows that they do it better than anyone else anywhere, you know. South Africa is not sure what South Africa does, you know, and we don't have that absolute clarity that permeates all of society and works itself out in different ways, and then therefore shows up when things like, you know, TED pop up, and when things like anywhere where the world needs very specific, you know, ideas from a particular part of the world, we kind of struggle a little bit, we think.
What about from other African countries? Because as the Loeries, you know, we're across Africa and the Middle East. So I'm so curious, do you think it's just a South African issue that we're not bringing the great creative ideas? Or is TED looking, going, hey, I've seen something from Nigeria and this is amazing. You go straight onto TED.com. What is happening in the rest of Africa and maybe even Middle East?
Yeah, so there are two parts to it. There's, on the African continent, there's also hosting TEDx events. And, you know, TEDx is not very sustainable on the continent, one. But if I have to compare, I would say, you know, Kenya, for example, Kenya pops up quite often, but it's also proximity to the global community. We actually are far. We are so far from the world.
With respect to Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, Namibia, no, seriously, with respect, the action happens far away from West Africa. We are the southernmost tip of the continent. A lot of the action is happening either in the far east or in the far west or the far north. You know, there's quite a big space between where we are and where the big action in the world is. Nobody's passing through South Africa going somewhere, I'll tell you that much. You know, and leaving a few ideas behind and picking up a few ideas. Nobody's doing that. When you come to South Africa, it's a huge trip. It's a huge trip for anyone. So geographically, we are in a disadvantageous position. You know, compare South Africa to, say, Marrakesh, Morocco. or even Lagos, Nigeria,
it's
and
closer to
that
get
West
to the
African
US.
hub, or maybe even Nairobi, Kenya, or where that East African hub, where it's so easy to travel from one country to the next in East Africa, Rwanda, when people here, South Africa is a special trip, and therefore if ideas also travel, with people, then they find it hard to pass through this part of the world.
Yeah, and I think, I try not to step into politics, but South African politics sucks. And that has actually done us a huge, it's done us a huge disservice. And this for me is the plea. So I travel a lot, and I've seen how, especially the international community, people have left. The international community has left South Africa. People don't want to host conferences here because to get a visa to come here for a conference for 5 days is like asking for blood. It's so hard. And when I travel and people are like, oh, we want to do something in Africa. It's, oh, we're going to Nairobi, we're going to Kigali, we even go to Accra and Lagos. And like, why are you not coming to Joburg or Cape Town? They're like, are you kidding?
But they might go to Cape Town.
Yeah, they'll go for holiday.
Find a way.
But for work, Kenya is doing well. And I try not to be very competitive, but when I go to Nairobi, I'm like, what is like, why? But when you look at it, at the core of it is our politics. Our politics are not friendly. Our politics are just bad. And when people want to get things done and ideas travel so fast, you miss it in a week, it's gone, When you look at the Middle East, there was a time in Tedx evolution where the Middle East was thriving, but there also the politics are challenging. So you find countries like Qatar where Tedx has the support of the government, and it will thrive. And at some point, Dubai, there was some government support, and then Tedx works. So but also the communities, they are very conservative, and Tedx is this open platform that in some cultures it's still like, that's a little too extreme. So in the Middle East, there are those challenges, but there's some amazing ideas. There are other platforms. When you look at Qatar, they have what they call the Doha debates. Yeah. When you look at places like Abu Dhabi, there's a huge creative community that's working there, but also the incentives in the Emirates allow for creatives to find ways of working. I mean, look at Al Jazeera as a TV platform.
Yeah.
It's amazing. They have amazing talent, and like, you never get that with SABC. Because it does not support that kind of creativity and nurture to nurture creative ideas and to see them to fruition. That's just my take.
This is so profound. Mohammed Jogi as well has mentioned that this is very, very profound in the chat as well. So Tati, I think one of the key points, this is exciting for me because we're hitting into some key issues. You're so right. The geographic challenges of South Africa make it very difficult for people with amazing ideas to come and leave their ideas here. But there's an opportunity this year, isn't there? Never let a good crisis go to waste, which we've heard hundreds of times in this year. I mean, yes. What we have right now is because of the challenges of COVID-19, we as a society are so much more open to consuming media via our devices. And we also have people who are very open to speaking to us from wherever they may be in the world via our computer screen. So there's an opportunity for us this year to have some ideas come here and stay here and have some amazing content stay in South Africa. Is that right?
Yeah, and I have to say, South Africa itself, I think it's an amazing idea because of our immediate history, and what we've been able to craft out of a very difficult situation. So our potential to inspire the world still lives. Whether we're inspiring the world or not, it's really up to us and what we do next and the work that we put in. Maybe, in our immediate past, we haven't put enough work. We've been, deviated a little bit, but there's absolutely no reason why we can't shine again and we can't find that USP. And one of those opportunities is the work that we're doing with the Loeries right now, which is looking for amazing people around the world to contribute their ideas and bring them to the table, to help inspire people in this part of the world, but not just in South Africa, in the broader Africa region, and all the way up to the Middle East. And it's not that hard to find those people, I've got to say, and it's also not hard to get them to say yes, because the world right now needs ideas. The world right now, needs the next big thing, the thing that's going to take us out of the mess that we're in, not just South Africa, the whole world, COVID-19 and so on. And therefore, people are looking for the opportunity to test their ideas. People are looking for the opportunity to share their ideas, their thoughts, and people are certainly looking for those who might have ideas and how they might help lead them out of this difficult situation, show the light, so to speak.
Yeah, I think you touched on a great point, which is the work we're doing together, which we appreciate all your support. Thank you to the both of you as well on that.
It's a great pleasure.
Is that finding this, and it's a good excuse for me to work with the both of you again, which I've enjoyed. You've got to find. I think that's the best way for ideas to move around, is to find excuses to work with people you really enjoy working with, and this is a perfect example of that. But I think I'm excited about the thought of bringing some amazing speakers from around the world and allowing them, especially in this year, to leave those amazing ideas with us, and to have that be an adventure between the both of us is amazing. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And that, as you know, the names that we've been, playing around with are some of the most exciting names in the creative world, and what we've tried, unfortunately, I can't mention exactly who they are because a lot of this work is in the pipeline, but that time will come in the new week. Hopefully we'll start announcing. But I think what's the breadth of, the range of the speakers for me has been encouraging. The fact that the idea that creativity lives in so many different spaces. I think sometimes in the creative industries, we look at, the narrow band of people who play with color or play with words and lines and so on. But when you step back a little bit and look, and look at, both ends of that band, you find people who are doing some amazing work, but they're not using lines and colors and words. And that's been very interesting. Yeah, that's been interesting. Just ideas live in so many different places, and in the most unexpected place, you can find an idea that could change the world, or could change how you see yourself as a human being, as an individual, or just what your understanding of the human experience is. And many of those people are packed in this spreadsheet that we call speakers. And I'm looking forward to them stepping onto the Loeries stage and sharing their thoughts and their ideas and their work, and those colors and lines and, beautiful words, and they will be there, but it's just so much. We're trying to find a bubble that goes much further than just, our usual everyday experience.
I know, that's great. And I think we need it right now. I think us as a region, as Africa and the Middle East, if we can bring in as much information as possible here, it's worth it. I have a theory, and hopefully the net will let me speak. If you actually look at the journey of the world, I studied archaeology, and Tati, I remember you're the first person who went, you need to use the word brand archaeologist. You're calling that for me.
I'm intrigued by that idea.
I use it now. I need to keep using it. I don't use it enough. But if you look at it, I always go, it's so important to see where the flow of revenue and which societies. I mean, there was a point when, it was Great Britain, and it was called Great Britain, and they had the center of the world, and they had all the real global financial power. And that eventually moved to the US. And they did it via media and coming up with brands and all of that. But their biggest challenge as well was as they grew, they didn't have the ability to produce those products within their borders at a scalable rate and at the right points. And therefore they outsourced it to China, which is why we see China being such a powerhouse, is because they fed the demand of the US. And if you actually look at the global space right now, and if you can plot their journey, so when the UK was doing really well, they're working closely with the USA. And if you look at the USA, when they're doing really well, who do they work with? They worked with China to be able to do it. And that's where the money went. All you really need to do is, if you want to know which is the next big major global powerhouse, see where China is spending its money. And where is China spending its money? In Africa. And I think therefore what we need is, we're getting the money that's coming in various areas, but we also need to have these ideas that come so that the ideas can meet the financial resources to make things happen. And I think that's what's amazing about the work that TEDx is doing right now.
Yeah. And I think for me, we talk a lot of COVID changed a lot of things and accelerated technology like beyond anyone's imagination. And when you talk about Africa, there's always I was reading an article yesterday that said, why didn't Africa suffer as much with COVID? And it's like, is it poverty? Is it it's like crazy, like, okay, because we poor, then didn't get COVID, whatever.
There's weird theories out there. I'm reading weird.
Should have been rich.
but for me,
it's a bad joke. I'm sorry.
The issue is, what is that investment? Because it's not the raw materials. Yes, China, part of the money now is spent on digging for raw materials to support the industrialization. But what is it that we have as a continent? And it's the human capital. And if we take a next logical step that says machines are going to do the bulk of the work, that's inevitable, and I'll be so happy not to have to work for 8 hours. What am I going to do with that time? And I think there's, for me, when you talk to creative industries, is to say there's an opportunity for the continent. There's a lot of creative talent here. There's a lot of everything, music, the things that make us human. A lot of them, the warmth, it's here. So if we nurture that creativity and turn it into money, that's where the investment is going to be.
I'm going to take an extreme example, and I say extreme because it's just so unlikely, and maybe we have to work out why it's a good example. So this past weekend on Saturday, I spent some time on a Zoom webinar. But there must be like maybe 40 people in the call. Every single one of them was a Sangoma.
Wow.
Right? So except for myself, But Sangomas and spiritual healers are now meeting on Zoom.
Who thought?
That's their primary platform for meetings.
And
consulting. Consulting. And funny enough, that just seems like a natural marriage, right? Having a discussion with people who are halfway across the world, that's
absolutely,
But this is where suddenly their value, has just received the most awesome amplification, and in the same way, you can take that and just transplant it to Africa. If Sangomas are a proxy for the continent is about, its value is about to be amplified in the most profound way. That's what I believe, but it's not just an instinct. It just makes sense. And it makes also, it looks like a good bet.
I agree. You're saying this, and I'm just thinking, even if you look at people across the world, whether they're in Western Europe or whether they're in North America, there's a lot of people who for generations have been out of Africa due to like atrocities such as the slave trade and stuff like that, who want to connect with Africa but cannot come here because there might be cost, and obviously now there's COVID. And what you tell me about sangomas, for as an example, there are individuals who might be going to a fortune teller or a palm reader in their own countries. Now there's a potential to say, why do that? There's a connection that you have, and a spiritual connection that you can have to the land of your ancestors in a way. And that's interesting. It's an export that you wouldn't logically think about, but Tati, here's a business idea. This is like you formalize this and market it in the States and in the UK and virtual consultations. This is, hopefully no one's listening to that. There we go. Everyone's listening to it.
But you take that and then you put it in education, put it in work. I mean, we are having this conference. We didn't have to spend money, and I didn't have to travel, get into a plane, fly to wherever you are. We didn't have to hire a venue. We didn't have to hire amazing cameras that can stand on their hands. The world is shifting to make things that were not possible before very possible, and to amplify things that couldn't be heard as loudly as possible. But also there's this wisdom that we haven't been tapping into, right? The world has been focusing in the West, and now there's this wisdom coming from the East that hasn't been tapped to, and we can now see that it's validated by the growth of China and Singapore and other economies in the East. And suddenly our minds are now opening up to alternative ideas. Both the minds of the people who are sitting in the southernmost part of the world and on this continent, but also those who are sitting at the top of the food chain. Now they are thinking, you know what, we might not know everything, or we might not be as knowledgeable as we thought. There might be other possibilities. Can we maybe look at that and consider, the other view? This is the moment when this is happening, and it's an exciting time. It's really, but we can't let it go. We can't waste it, and that's my biggest fear. My biggest nightmare is if nothing comes out of this. And I'm not just talking about COVID. I'm talking about this possibility that's made real by technology, and this opening up of our hearts and our minds.
Maybe this leads to another good question from Mohammed Jogi. Asks, what do you believe are the major roadblocks to innovation? So I'll repeat that. I said that really quickly. What do you believe are the major roadblocks to innovation?
I think for me, it's one, role modeling. You see a lot of young people. So one of the success stories of Tedx, just to dive that a bit, is 2013, I think, when we did Tedx Johannesburg. There was a speaker, a professor from Wits, who had this idea that he wants to build this software development hub in Braamfontein. And he had just found a building that used to be a nightclub. Remember?
Yes, I remember this. Yes.
Simulogong is built, it's supported, it has like tech entrepreneurs that are doing amazing work, but the support that they get could be so much bigger if they could just hop into Sandton and have access to your big tech companies who open their doors and say, let me show you how I made it. But that gap, there's actually, South Africa is very painful in that division. We have like a very huge part of society that is very advanced, which is like here in the northern suburbs and in some spaces in Cape Town. And they've literally closed the door. So if you are a young person from Soweto and want to know how to be a successful entrepreneur, you can't just walk into someone's office in Sandton and say, can I shadow you?
Yeah.
In other societies, that happens. And I think that's the biggest barrier. And that really kills.
And I'll tell you what the second biggest barrier is, a very close second, is corruption. It's the money we waste by just deviating the path that goes to creating value. It's like, hey, instead of going there, how about you take a small little turn into a brown envelope and you do some other work instead?
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of ideas die. That's where ideas go to die, actually, the brown envelope. That's where good work goes to die. It gets into a brown envelope and gets buried in somebody's big, stupid mansion.
You know, I have an analogy for that that's so good. Is the last week I had to drive on a road that was freshly made. It was a freshly made, it hadn't even had the lines painted in it. And it was so bad. It was just absolutely bumpy and you could see the unevenness. And I looked at this and went, this road was created because somebody did the same thing. Brown Envelope didn't have the capabilities, but they were able to pay to get this contract and make this road. And it hasn't even been completed properly as yet. And you're absolutely right. And the same thing happens with ideas as well. You may have the most amazing ideas, and the people who, if you channel the funds through them, they will be able to come through like an amazing part and bring amazing value to society. But again, it goes to the person who's going to create the bumpy road, and it's not really going to be the best.
And that person is not looking to create good work. That's not what they're doing. They're doing some other project, you know. And the people funding him, giving him that money, that's not what they're doing. And that's the tragedy of South Africa, you know, together with, you know, the point that Kelo brings up.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the latest example is on COVID and PPEs, when other countries use the money to innovate on how we can localize the manufacturing of some of these things that we need. People took the money, and in a pandemic, people stole money.
At the worst possible time to do it. They were like, my man.
Let's make some money.
Yeah.
I know. It just shows human society is not altruistic. We're out of time. Why don't we spend more time doing this? I blame Eskom for our issues at the beginning, but maybe I want to end off on before we do our final questions. So again, from home, has got lots of questions. After 10 years of doing amazing, by that means amazing work. And this is what's important, I think, right now because of ideas. Which Mohammed asked, do you think that support for the work that you're doing is growing?
I think so, in a strange way. So ideally, when you do this kind of work, the first thing that comes to mind is like, I want someone to sign me a check so that I can do this. The check is still not there, but the conviction, we find that more people are willing to support. And, you know, we're doing 2.5 events this year, and we didn't have to do proposals for them. And that for me was like, oh, okay, that's weird. You know, when someone is convinced that the TEDx platform works and they say, I want to work with you guys because I know the platform works. For me, that's huge. But there's also support in other ways that I see. There's so many conference platforms in South Africa now that are not TEDx, and I cannot directly attribute them to the work that we started. But, you know, you see platform and people are like, TED Talk format, TEDx like something. And you just see how creative and how different conferencing has become. And I think for me, that's support.
But I think also, you know, without a doubt, and I say this with the utmost humility, without a doubt, the biggest platform for ideas in South Africa, in Africa, probably also in the Middle East, is the Loeries.
Oh, thank you. Wow.
Yeah. And here we are speaking to the Loeries. It didn't happen 10 years ago, it's happening today. So yeah, absolutely, man.
That's support.
That's support of the highest level.
Thank you so much. And as I said, you know, it starts with these relationships. You never know how it's going to go apart and meet again. And I'm thankful for our relationship as well. As I said, we're out of time, but Kelo and Tati, you're doing amazing work inspiring everyone. So thank you for all of that. And thank you for all of the amazing work you're doing. And I'm looking forward to sharing a lot more of your hard work and the amazing stuff you've done through the Loeries as well, when we have our Loeries Creative Week in November.
Yeah, we can't wait. We're looking forward to it. Exciting stuff coming up.
Yeah. And thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's listening. So we'll see you in November.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Kelo
Thank you.
Kubu, who is the TEDx ambassador, and Tati Mokoro, who is the TEDx curator. Thank you to the both of you for your time. Thank you for joining. Thank you to everyone who bared with our challenges with technology at this time, and appreciate your time. Have a good weekend. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Tati. Cheers, Kelo. Bye-bye.
Bye. I want to say thanks to more. Oh, gone. Okay, that was